plainly and simply is a high tolerance for pain. To put it very, very simply, if you're going to revitalize a dying church, you're going to bring a dying church back to life, in every sense of the word, it's like rescuing a drowning swimmer. They need to be rescued, but they're likely going to beat you up all the way to the shore. I mean, they're not going to be happy about it. And you're going to be the target of a lot of angst, a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness, a lot of hurt. The reason this church is in such a disarray and so close to closure is they've had really bad leadership. They've made really poor decisions. Things have gone really bad for a long time. And now you show up and you're going to be the focus now of all of the stuff they're working out on each other and on their former leaders and on the former mistakes they made. And you're going to be the focus of that. And in many ways, a dying church is kind of like a sports team, a football team, if you will, that has had 2 or 3 winless seasons. I mean, the locker room is not a happy place. And you come be a coach of a winless team, man, you're setting yourself up for a lot of heartache. And that's true in a replanting of a dying church. You're not going to a place where the members are healthy and they trust one another, because basically if they did, they probably wouldn't be dying. So you're going to a very dysfunctional place. And there's a lot of interpersonal conflict, a lot of problems that you don't even see, a lot of landmines you don't even know about. And that's one of the really most frustrating parts about a revitalization, is you don't know where to step, man. You think you're doing right, and then you step on a landmine and everything blows up, and you had no idea that was there. And it's like those things happen all the time. And sometimes then you just get really, really, you pull yourself back into a corner. I know when I was in college 100 years ago, I had a professor that told us about a test they did with some chickens. And I don't know if they would do that this day and age because it sounds a little inhumane, but they did it. They would put the chicken on one side of this box and put some feed on the other side of the box. And then there would be some electrodes between the chicken and the feed. And if the electrodes stayed in the very same place, eventually the chicken would figure it out and could get from the one side of the box to the feed by avoiding the electrodes. You get it? But on the other chicken in the other box, where every day they changed the electrodes and moved them around, it got so bad that the chicken stayed in one place and starved to death because he never could figure out where the electrodes were. And I've always thought about that as a pastor. You know, the biggest challenge we have sometimes is not knowing where the landmines are. And every time we move in one direction, we get hit with that. We move in this direction, we get hit with that. And so what happens sometimes is we just quit moving at all. We just literally stay in one place and we get into defensive mode and we just don't want to get hurt anymore. And that is a dangerous place to be, trust me. So when we look at the 8 characteristics of a revitalizing pastor or a replant leader, high tolerance for pain is right up there at the top. I mean, it really has to be. You have to be able to absorb a lot of anger, a lot of frustration from people. You have to take on a lot of stuff that's not your fault. You're going to have to deal with a lot of wounds that you didn't create. And so let's talk for a minute about the kind of pain. First, one of the kinds of pain you're going to have to deal with is this pain of not being successful. You go to a dying or a declining church, it's not likely going to turn around the first Sunday you get there, all right? It's probably not as bad as it's going to get. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. It may not have bottomed out yet, and you may have to ride that thing down to the bottom in some ways. I imagine church discipline hasn't ever been really biblically handled, and they probably have financial issues, and they have skeletons in the closet people don't know about. And so in many senses of the word, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And so if your identity and your self-esteem is all tied up in how fast this church grows, by the way, it shouldn't be anyway, but if your identity and your self-esteem is all tied up in how fast this church grows, you're going to be in one bad place in a revitalization and a replant. I mean, you cannot find your self-worth. Listen to me. You cannot find your self-worth in how many people are in the pews on Sunday morning, all right? You shouldn't do that anyway. But in a revitalization, you just can't do that because you'll get so discouraged and so despondent. I know, I've been there. I mean, at Warnell Road Baptist Church, it seated 610 people. We had about 20 there on Sunday mornings for the first few months, and it swelled to about 30 after about a year and a half. And I mean, 30 people in a sanctuary that seats 600. Man, there were times, you've heard me say it before, there were some Sundays I wanted to pull the fire alarm just so I wouldn't have to preach. I mean, it got to be really draining on me. And you have to have a high tolerance for pain that you're not wrapping your own sense of self-worth up into how many people are coming. You also have to have a high tolerance for pain, and that people are, as I said, like a drowning swimmer. You're going to be rescuing them. You're going to be helping them find ways to the future, but they're not going to like a lot of the decisions they have to make, and you're going to be the focus of their discontent. And they'll likely tell you exactly what they think, or even worse, they won't tell you to your face, but they'll talk about you to your back. And you'll hear it from other places. And you'll get those dreaded emails that say, people are talking, or people are saying, or just before you go into the pulpit on Sunday morning, some dear saint will grab your arm and say, a lot of us have been talking, and some of us are concerned about these things, and then they'll list them just before you preach. I mean, we've all been there and done that. And then the way it affects your family. We've said on many occasions, it could be that your wife may be, she's being looked at through the lens of the best pastor's wife they ever had in the last 75 years. And so the way she dresses, the way she talks, the way she handles the kids, does she come early, does she stay late, does she help in the kitchen, does she help in the nursery, does she sing? I mean, all of those things. And after a while, it really can wear on her. How does she handle the children? How well are the children behaved? And the children, they may be the only kids in the church or among the few children in the church. And so you may really begin to feel like it's really wearing on your family. And it probably is and probably will. And likewise, they're not afraid. Many members are not afraid. Many members are not afraid to go to your wife and tell her how they think things aren't going well. And so she's going to hear that as well. And maybe even some of your children may even hear it, depending on how old they are. So, I mean, the pain of not seeing immediate numerical results, the pain of constantly being criticized and pushed on for every decision you're trying to help them make that is a godly decision that helps them follow the path that Jesus wants them to take. And then the pain of really seeing how this affects your family and how it can drain on them. And then there's the most intense pain, and all of that is powerfully painful. But the most intense pain is really the spiritual warfare where all of this is from the adversary. You got that? I mean, none of it's from the members. It's all because the adversary has captured their attention, captured their heart. He's using them, and they don't even know it, and they're not aware of it. And so he's getting at you through them. But he'll also come at you. If you make a statement and a commitment, you're going to revitalize and replant. For God's glory, you're going to reclaim this church. And you're going to be faithful to that. Man, the adversary is going to double down on you. I mean, totally. Financially, emotionally, health-wise, your family, your cars will break down, your refrigerator will go out. I don't mean to be facetious about that. He's not going to let up. And you're going to begin to think, man, where is all this coming from? And you have to remember exactly where it's coming from. You're not on the front lines. You have parachuted in behind the lines. Lately I've been watching a whole lot of World War II documentaries, and especially D-Day, and I'm from Kansas, and out here not too far from where I live is Abilene, Kansas, where General Eisenhower grew up. And there's an amazing picture, of General Eisenhower. He meets with all these paratroopers before they get on the planes. They're gonna land behind the enemy lines in Normandy, and they're gonna take bridges and then wait for the infantry to get there, right? And so he drives up and he stops his car and he gets out, and they're all surprised to see the commanding general. And he engages these young men in conversation. They're all covered in blackface, and they're getting ready to, in the commando raid, to drop behind enemy lines. And as General Eisenhower is talking to them, he's aware that it's likely that half of those young men will not be here 24 hours from now, that they will actually give their life. And he realizes how dangerous it is. Now, look, I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that the sacrifice you or I make to replant a dying church is to the level of the sacrifice of those young men who gave their lives for our freedom. But I am suggesting we do sometimes talk about, church planting is like hitting the beach. It's on the beachhead, on the adversary. If church planting is the beach, replanting is dropping behind enemy lines in the cover of darkness and trying to hold on. I mean, that's really what it is. And so the enemy's not going to let up on you. He's going to attack you from every possible angle. And he's going to attack, as I said, he'll attack your finances, he'll attack your health, he'll attack your family, he'll attack your emotions. Man, I really didn't struggle much with depression when I was a church planter. Now, I know some church planters do, and I'm not, whatever. I'm just telling you my story. For 20, 25 years, God allowed me to be part of planting 10 or 12 churches. And there were bad days and difficult days, but it was always such a forward and optimistic kind of ministry, always looking to the future, always looking to what God was going to do yet. And our launch team was always excited about the future. It was when I got involved in a replant, all right, that I began to struggle with bouts of really serious depression. And still to this day, I still have to battle it and be aware of it and cognizant of it. And I think it's in many ways, it's where the adversary comes at us. He knows if we have a tendency toward depression anyway, maybe even a biological tendency toward depression, he doesn't let off on that. He's not like, I'm getting ready to watch a lot of college football coming up, and let's say there's a defensive back who's like, he's all American, and he pulls a groin or something. He goes out for a few plays, and they bring in this rookie, this freshman. Well, do you think the quarterback on the other team is going to say, you know what, we ought to lay off on that rookie over there and not pick on him. We don't want to embarrass him. No, the quarterback's going to go, look at that. That's the most vulnerable spot on the team. Listen, as a church replanter, all right, and I know what I'm talking about. If you struggle with obesity, if you struggle with depression, if you struggle with anger issues, if you struggle with anything you struggle with, those are the areas of weakness that he's not going to let up. He's going to drill down on those. Why? Because he wants to rob God of his glory. And you have just shown up to a place and you have just told Satan and all of his demonic army, you're not taking this place, all right? This one's not yours. We're going to reclaim this for God's glory. And he's not just going to go away. He's going to battle you every step of the way. Let me read real quick from a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. And my friend Brian Croft uses this passage a lot. He was the first one that ever unpacked it for me and really began to speak to my heart. It's the end of the letter of Paul to the church at Corinth in that first letter in chapter 16. And listen to what he says. He talks about his travel plans, and he says in verse 7, I don't want to see you now just in passing, since I hope to spend some time with you, if the Lord allows. He said, I'm going to stay here in Ephesus, that's where he was, until Pentecost. Listen, verse 9, because a wide door of effective ministry has opened for me, and there are many adversaries. The Apostle Paul wanted to go and spend some time with the believers in Corinth. But the reason he gave for staying at Ephesus, are you ready for this? Was because A, there was lots of opportunity, and B, there was lots of adversaries. And the two go hand in hand. And if you're going to revitalize and replant a church, you have to be ready for all of the opportunities that are out there. But understand that there are going to be adversaries. Satan is not going to give up. He's not going to roll over. And if you're the kind of person that has a real thin skin, you can't take it when people criticize you, and you just fall into a heap and get into a fetal position and you're done for, or you can't take it if there people don't just affirm you every Sunday and think you're the greatest pastor they've ever had, or you can't take it if some of your peers ask you, hey, how many are you running on Sunday? And you have to say, well, probably 20 less than when we got there. We're down to 15 people. And that just eats away at you. That's what I mean. You have to have a high tolerance for pain. And how, Mark, finally, get around to this, where's that high tolerance for pain come from? I am so glad you asked. Because it doesn't come from inside you. It doesn't come from the affirmation of other people. It comes from one place and one place alone. It comes from knowing that the sovereign God of this entire universe sought you out before you were born, knew who you would be at this church where you're serving, sought you out, drew you to himself, saved you entirely and completely, wrote your name in the Lamb's Book of Life, has a place prepared in his house just for you, and has given you his righteousness and his perfection. When the Father looks at you and looks at me, he sees us not as one whose sin has been washed away, but he sees us as one who's never sinned at all because of what Christ has done. And not only that, he sees all the joy he has in his son Jesus for all that he did. All of that joy is given to us. He has joy when he sees us because he sees his son and the glory of Jesus as that has been, in every sense of the word, we are benefiting from what Jesus has accomplished on Calvary's cross. So our purpose, our joy, our satisfaction in ministry has to come from the cross. Period. It has to come from what Jesus has done for me. That's enough. It has to come from the fact that he's never going to leave me and he's never going to forsake me. And his grace is all sufficient. And as Corrie ten Boom says, there's no pit so deep that God is not deeper still. And if you read Paul's writings, you see there were all kinds of times he was overwhelmed with things. There's one place where he says, we were so crushed, we thought we were going to physically die. Hey, I've been there. But then Paul says, but that was just so that we would look to Jesus who can raise the dead. There it is. Your hope is in the fact that you serve a God, you serve a Savior who can raise the dead. Man, what more power do you need than that? And my good friend Andy Davis, I love his book Revitalized, the whole chapter on spiritual depression. He talks about the way you battle spiritual depression is you got to put on the armor of God. You got to put on the breastplate of righteousness. You got to put on the helmet of salvation. If you go out there without the full armor of God, you're going to get shredded. And what Satan does is he gets you and I so depressed and so discouraged in ministry that we never pick up the armor of God. We never put it on. If you have an enemy that has an armor that you cannot penetrate, what's your only hope? Your only hope is to try to get him not to put that armor on. And so the discouragement, the disillusionment, the depression, all that comes from all the stuff involved in revitalization tends to have us as leaders not even get up and put the armor of God on, not spend time in God's Word, not spend time alone with Jesus, not listen to Him and think on Him and preach the gospel to ourselves every day, as the Puritans used to say. If you're going to be a revitalizing pastor, you are going to have to endure some really difficult pain for quite a while. And you're going to have high tolerance for it. Now, one of the ways we talked in another podcast, one of the ways you can deal with this with your family is you can help them find a church nearby that might adopt them in some ways. If there's a healthy church that's got a Thursday night home Bible study group, man, go talk to that pastor. Say, can my family and I come to your home Bible study group, your gospel community group? Can you minister to my wife and kids? Because it's really hard over here where we are at church. And you need to find some other places. And you personally need to be in a group of other men who are revitalizing churches, whether it's preferably in person, but if not, online, and find some way to connect every day or every week with those guys so they can feed into you and you can feed into them. Because I promise you this, no one is going to go to a revitalized situation, a replant situation, and not just get beat to a pulp by the adversary. It's just going to happen. You know, Paul says, hey, I was 5 times beaten with 39 lashes. I was shipwrecked. I was in prison. I mean, Paul tells you everything that went through and how he was attacked from those near him and those outside of him. And he understood all of that. And you read all of what Paul talks about and you go, that's what we go through. And sometimes the real issue is we don't expect it. I don't know, we think we show up, and just because we show up as the revitalizing pastor and the replant leader, that it's going to be just fine. They're going to listen to us, and everything's going to be all right, and yet you're going to a dysfunctional place, and that's not going to happen. So bottom line, find your joy in Jesus. Find your fulfillment in your obedience to Him. Understand that He will take all that you're doing in this church, and in eternity, He's going to make something amazing out of it. You may not even see it this side of heaven, but know that every sermon you preach, every time you share the gospel, every time you pray with integrity with a member, everything you do for that church, God is going to use for His glory. And don't let the adversary distract you from that. And my friends, I know how hard it is. And you have to battle depression, battle discouragement. You have to double down and work really hard on your marriage. As Johnny Hunt says, discuss and dialogue with your wife every day. Date your wife every week. Go someplace with her. And he says, depart with her every 3 months. I mean, find some way to get away if you can at all. If you got to just get a pup tent and go to a campground and get somebody to watch the kids. But you're going to have to really double down and focus on your marriage in these replant situations. You're going to have to focus on your health. You're going to have to focus on your emotional health and your mental health. You're going to have to find your joy in Jesus and not in necessarily the ministry that you're involved in. And if you'll do that, you'll develop that high tolerance for pain. And here's the thing. After 4, 5, 6, 7 years, those things that were so painful in those early years begin to be worn off and go away. And you really do begin to get your sea legs under you. Trust me, I've been there. And 6, 7, 8 years. But man, most of us don't last that long. Most replanters and most revitalizers leave in a year or 2, maybe 3. It just wears them down. And I know it does. And I'm not trying to make you feel worse or lay coals of guilt on you. I'm just trying to say, man, find your joy in Jesus. One of the things about a revitalization is it forces you to find your joy not in your work, but in what Jesus has already done for you. And man, if you've got any questions about that, you can email us at replant@nam.net. You can visit churchreplanters.com. We've got blogs on there. If you go to Revitalize and Replant with Tom Rayner and I, that podcast, we've got some podcasts where we deal with depression, discouragement, and all of that. And at the end of the day, if you don't have that kind of high tolerance for pain, then this isn't someplace you should be. There's another ministry role for you out there where it's not quite as critical that you have it. But if you're going to replant or revitalize a church, you have to have that high tolerance for pain. And that high tolerance for pain comes from nowhere else other than Jesus Christ, his gospel, leaning into him every day and letting, this is what the scripture says, in your weakness he's made strong. And letting him become strong in your weakness. And that's a really important thing that you're going to have to learn. So hope this is helpful to you, and look forward to see you next Monday night. We'll take another characteristic. Next Monday night, we're going to look at two of them. We're going to look at multi-generational leadership and something that's really important in my life, be called a resourceful generalist. May not sound all that exciting, but trust me, if you're going to replant a church, you have to be a resourceful generalist. Hey, email me your questions if you want to. We'll maybe answer some of them on some of these Monday Nights with Mark. Thanks for so many of you watching, and I'm grateful it's been helpful to you. Again, go to churchreplanters.com and get all kinds of resources that the North American Mission Board has for you there. All right? Y'all have a good night. We'll see you later.